feels like I'm going to open a comic book. There's a variety of tones. It doesn't know where to stick it, but it's going to have fun along the way.
Hi, I'm Teresa. Welcome to Cocoon Cast, where we deep dive into movies and discuss all things cinema.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. Today we'll be discussing the new movie, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom.
Rebecca, let's get started.
Arthur Curry, after years of searching for his purpose in life, finally has it all as the king of Atlantis. But when his enemy, the Black Manta, resurfaces with a powerful Atlantean artifact in order to take over the throne, Arthur has to choose to set aside old grievances and forge a new path worthy of being a king.
This is a sequel.
No bones about it.
No bones, yeah, no fish about it. You were excited for the sequel.
I was nervous that it took him this long to release the first trailer so close to the release date, but I was still excited. I was not a huge fan of the first Aquaman. I did appreciate that they tried to take the character into comedic and serious territory at the same time, which I think is pretty smart because there's two ways you can play Aquaman. You can be very Mr. Edgy Broody with a beard, or he can just be the running gag of, who are you going to call? Aquaman and his pile of merry fish.
And how do you think it fared on that up front?
I think the sequel has been doing really good as like a comic book movie. It feels like I'm going to open a comic book. There's a variety of tones. It doesn't know where to stick it, but it's going to have fun along the way.
I admit, I remember seeing Aquaman 1. I was there. I was fish, chaos, everything.
What did it ensue?
It would ensue, actually. I don't remember big, huge parts of it. It didn't stand out. And I understand it's been, 2018, about 5 years. I was not like, wow, the next one's coming. Then I'm like, oh, that's right. He is the fish guy. He's back. He feels like Aquaman. I will give him that. You know, the rings and the tattoos and the voice and the, the flowy hair, especially when he's underwater, right? The hair really flows.
Oh my gosh, that man has Revlon hair.
He does. I don't know. I honestly remember reading more about the controversy. Amber Heard's in there and she was complaining, not too many scenes. Nicole Kidman as his mom just feels kind of strange to me.
I guess. I think the interesting thing that they chose to do with Aquaman, especially in the film adaptation, is to take the story. He's a second culture child. That means that he's from the human culture, but he's also from this very prestigious Atlantean culture, and he's trying to find out where he fits in life. And they kind of carry that over to the second one a bit.
Okay, so let's talk about that. The second one starts off with him very domestic.
Very.
Right? He's married to Mira. They have a baby.
They have a lot of sweaters.
A lot of sweaters. Lighthouse on their property. Very common, apparently, for aqua people. But I enjoyed that part where he was trying to be a dad and connecting with his dad, the relational part. And he says, oh, yeah, it's kind of my side hustle is going down underwater. And then he starts complaining.
Is that where he lost you? I'm trying to figure out, because I know in the...
Well, the suit kind of makes me... I'm like, oh, he's doing the drying of his clothes and, it's hanging on the clothesline. I'm like, all right, I'm still kind of hanging in there, but then it just sort of got strange.
I mean, you're talking about somebody in another universe that has powers that allow them to basically manipulate the whim of the ocean with their very whim. And I'm not talking about like Mira's like hydromancy. I'm talking about somebody who has the power and the influence to have the seas rise up against somebody who earns his wrath, I guess.
Well, and of course there's always somebody bad.
There is, and I was very happy we had a returning bad guy.
Let's talk about that. Why were you excited? Because he's still bad and there's more to do? Or I just really liked him the first time and I was excited to see him again? Or what was that about?
Black Manta is Aquaman's villain. You want to talk a key villain? That's Black Manta. You also have Ocean Master, which kind of happened in the first film. And there's some character resolution with that. But there was enough of a tease with Black Manta that I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And then they went into Ocean Master. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. But I was really happy to see that he's bigger, he's badder, he's taking no prisoners, baby.
I'm cracking up because you really like this. And I'm over here going, wow, there's just fish, fish, fish. And I remember reading about the green screens and so many fish. And I think you're saying, where did they lose me? I think I like the idea of just so many fish and everything is happening, but it was just cut, and just fish. And they start off, in my mind, pretty strong and steady with him, living on the land, enjoying that. It just felt very just move. Not slowly he's going into the water and fish are around him. It just felt like, bam, okay, here we go. You're in trouble. Oh, wait a minute. You don't want to be
the comic book for you. Everything starts off great, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, Superman's picking up a car and some guy's running off in the corner going, what do we do? What do we do?
Did it feel like it jumped really fast, though, to you?
I can understand that. I think they set that up pretty well in the prologue, where he's like, I don't know if this king stuff is all it's cracked up to be. Sure, I like being like this tough guy who's like, you can't mess with Atlantis. But then you get to this point where he's like, I have to go to these board meetings and it sucks.
I think that's relatable to the average person.
But
meaning if you go to work and you're like, oh, I got to do this. And he's like falling asleep, and his wife's going, and I thought, wow, I think, again, it was trying to be relatable, which I appreciated. But the effects were...
Did it feel like two separate movies to you? I know at one point...
That's a good point, actually.
I felt like it was watching two different movies. I'm used to the tonal changes. Because, again, I read a bunch of comic books. Every once in a while will be this random one-liner, and you're like, you're supposed to be fighting for the fate of the universe, and you're popping off with this lame joke.
I also think you really like the first one. I think there was a lot of goodwill going into that.
This is going to surprise you. The first one is actually one of my lowest DCEU rated films. I like the team behind the first one.
Sure.
I love James Wan. I'm a huge Saw fan, has been discussed on the show. I love The Conjuring. It's another great horror film franchise. I love the fact that James Wan took his experience and you could feel it. You could feel when he was in his wheelhouse. And it was really exciting to me because there was originally a project that they had canceled. It's called The Trench.
Oh, okay. And is that a horror film also?
They were trying to design it like a horror film.
Oh, okay.
You remember that big gully of like scary sea zombie people in the first one? It was going to be focused around that.
Okay.
But
it's
when
coming.
one is playing with his wheelhouse, when he's playing with character motivation, when he's playing with just general unsettling creepiness and actual scary moments for a PG-13 film, you know the man is on fire. And that's what I'm passionate about with this film is there are moments where you really connect with the characters. Granted, some of that may be added by flashback scenes.
Sure, that's true.
Which I thought was a little bit of a cheap cop-out and kind of my audience is a little dumb. Let me remind them about this thing that happened a few years ago. Or people like you that...
Correct. I'm like, hey, thank you. I appreciate that.
But I'm just going to assume my audience is going to binge watch the first film before my movie. So I'm just like, why am I adding this?
That's interesting, though, because we're two different audience or two different demographics. For me, I'm thinking, just like I said, right, 5 years, thank you. I'm like, oh, that's what happened. So my whole thought is always, if I go into a movie, yes, I understand it's sort of a sequel, but it's kind of not. It's a little bit of an add-on, sort of not. I expect the movie to tell me the story.
You want to know what okay. Remember we watched Avatar, the first Avatar before Shape of Water came out, right?
Yeah, I remember that.
Disney was smart. They did a re-release campaign.
That was smart. I agree with that.
Especially because the second one is such a direct link in so many ways. Like, you see a character die in the first one, and then you see that character's perspective of almost having to live through that again. I think as a director, it kind of cheapens your ability to craft emotion with these.
If you don't tell the story, or if you haven't...
If you show through flashbacks through the story. Unless there's like a plot device, like say a magic mirror that shows you all these moments that happened again.
I get that. However, I would say if you want me to see the movie, and to me, it's just realistic. Hey, I'm going to assume you're not binge watching. Hey, I'm going to assume you don't remember. Although I will say, even without the flashbacks, the story...
I think it could have held up better. Honestly, if you didn't have these flashbacks, it kind of wrecked the movie for me in some ways.
Okay.
I get why it was doing it. I mean, again, if it was a comic book, I can understand. Insert this panel from this run just to show that you're directly pulling from that. But in a movie, it gets painful. And James Wan is enough of a skilled director that he doesn't need to do that.
And you liked a lot about this movie. You liked the music. You had commented on that a lot.
I felt like it really took the futurism of Atlantis, but it also still was able to create a familiar enough soundscape that you could tell where the composer was going with it.
I appreciated actually the music a lot because it did. It gave me a feel of what's happening. And I don't not like Jason Momoa, but I don't think the screenplay was overly strong. That didn't grab me.
I agree. The screenplay needs a little bit more oomph. There is definitely some points where it just felt like you're just naming off reference, naming off reference, naming off reference. So the folks at home are like, oh, there's an emotional landmark I can grab onto. That got annoying after a while. I directly compared this to Tony Stark in the MCU.
Oh, fair.
In our car ride over the studio, because I feel like Tony has space in between those moments where you know that he's trying to make a joke in order to mask his emotional pain. In fact, they name drop this trope in the Aquaman movie at one point. But I feel like Tony has enough seriousness in between those moments that it doesn't feel like they're trying to, oh, let's make him funny. Fish are funny. No, it just annoys me because
I just laugh. Fish are funny. Really? I thought they were dinner.
VeggieTales and the fish slapping pirates. Anyone?
One point I would say, and no disrespect to Jason Momoa, I just think Robert Downey Jr. is just a far better actor. I think the script, Jason Momoa can handle it. It just felt like there was just a phone-in quality to some of the acting that went with it. It was like, okay, we're going to. This just really flat affect.
I will say Patrick Wilson is definitely earning his paycheck here. Not only has he worked with Juan before, but he really puts his all into the characters. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, some of the other characters I wish had that same oomph. And you could really feel it in certain scenes, but it was kind of uneven throughout the movie in some ways.
The other thing, too, the movie was shorter than the first one. And I know some of the critique has been because it was shorter, it needed to be longer. It was choppy. And as you were saying, it felt like two separate movies. And there were parts of it where it did. And I think that was the part where it was here, it was here, it was here, it was here. And as you said, there is something about that. But to me, there was a pacing challenge.
I can see that. There is definitely one monologue at the end that feels like, oh, we didn't wrap this up with a screenplay. Nice little bow.
And
Here you
I
go.
talked about that, where it's at the end, just throw it all in, literally throw fish and fins and everything. And let's wrap it up. And I wasn't impressed with that. It just felt like, gosh, no, if this is your last installment or if this is your sequel, leave me hanging if you're going to leave me hanging. But does it have to wrap up? Well, if it does, then maybe make it more deliberate as you're going there, because I think the screenplay had that challenge, but I also think the screenplay had the challenge of there were a few little catchy, cute little lines.
And it was like, oh, we can't decide which one to get rid of, so we'll just keep them all.
It just didn't work for me with the screenplay, even though I understood the characters. I felt, even though I couldn't remember a lot of the other, it did start to come back a little bit more to me. But I don't know. I don't remember too much of Aquaman from my youth and when I was younger. I do remember more comic books, or I think it was...
Well, you grew up with Super Friends. I remember you and I had discussed that at one point.
And he wasn't super exciting. And I just laughed because it seemed like he had more kind of looked more like his brother, kind of the blonde cut versus, flowy Manoa kind of a thing. So
Flowy Momoa is definitely a more modern interpretation of Aquaman.
Correct. I would agree with that. Do we have any questions from the box?
In our pre-production, we reviewed The Flash, and I believe one or more of you liked The Flash. Compare this to The Flash. Do you think The Flash was better? Do you think this was better? Which one would you choose?
I think the thing you're going to have with comparing The Flash is tonally, it is different. Barry Allen and his assorted speedsters create a different tone to the DCU when they step into it. Aquaman creates a different tone to the DCU. Honestly, I'm not going to lie. I like the Flash family a lot more than the Aqua family. There's some characters I like a little bit, but Barry's struggles and the stories that come out of them, I find that I like them better when they're translated to film and TV. I feel like Arthur just needs a little bit more finesse with his story skills.
I agree. Some of that I don't I don't understand, right? But I would say I like The Flash 10 times better. I thought the writing was better. I thought Ezra Miller acted better. He felt more congruent. Clearly there was a lot of heavy emotion, whereas Aquaman's dilemma was with his brother, and obviously, his child is, missing underwater. Spoiler alert. However,
he gets kidnapped a lot in the comics.
I hear that. It just felt, and I try to suspend it, right? It's a comic book. I try to suspend. This is fantasy. This doesn't happen. As far as I know, underwater Atlantis is not there. Although when you were younger, I think you would have tried to convince me otherwise. But it just didn't grab me. It wasn't like, oh, this is such a great, wonderful story. Although it's such a magical story. And even though The Flash is clearly fantasy as well, for some reason it felt more real. It resonated. I had a lot more of an emotional connection with The Flash and the challenges that he had.
And it kind of makes me sad too, because I know where they're going with the story beats that they're trying to tell.
Sure.
And with just a little bit more work, I feel like you could have a really compelling story to mainstream audiences. That's why I was so surprised when the first one became this massive hit.
Huge hit.
And I'm like, oh, great. They've got some good bones to start with. Let's do this. And it just, in some ways, this feels like a parody of a superhero movie.
It does to me. And you're, in my mind, the expert in the superhero genre. I recognize I'm slightly, not jaded, I would say, but I'm naive. However, I don't think they say, hey, no, you don't remember that too much. Don't come see our movie. I hear them say, hey, come see our movie. Like you said, there's trailers, and this movie was over a $200 million budget movie. Clearly, they want as many people as possible to see this movie. Do we have any other questions from the box?
This movie is the 15th and final installment in the DC Extended Universe. Can you talk about what that means? And then have you heard any rumors of where it's going to go from here?
So the DCEU started with Man of Steel. Anything that's been a DC film, minus the animated series that have kind of come in the interim, are considered DCEU. There's the DC TV series, that's the shows like Legends of Tomorrow, that's The Flash, that's Supergirl, that's Lois and Superman. But I think it's really interesting to see how the expectations have changed over the years, and especially the critical response to these films. I know James Gunn and Peter Safran have openly shared plans for a new Superman movie. And I think that's really exciting to me because Superman is the core of the DC universe in general. Every character, whether you like it or not, is a response to Superman's ethos. Whether they're more closely aligned to it or they're against it, Superman becomes the barometer of how well your universe is going to succeed.
Interesting. I'm thinking of Mickey Mouse and Disney for some reason. I'm thinking that's the core. But DC has good characters. Batman.
And there's a lot of characters that really haven't gotten the spotlight. We kind of saw a little bit with Black Adam. I was really finally happy to see Carter Hall and Dr. Fate and all these other miscellaneous little characters. I'd love to see more niche DC attempts. I'd love to see each series has its own tone, maybe like a Justice League Dark series where it's a little bit more supernaturally focused.
That would be interesting.
And I just want DC to take a chance on its creators. I know a few years back, we were at WonderCon. We got really lucky to see a screening of Batman Ninja.
Correct. I remember that.
And I remember commenting to you, did you notice the difference between the animated films and the live action films? And you said yes.
Yes.
And one of the things that they really emphasized in the Q&A was almost comedic at this point, given what was going on in the DCEU landscape.
Sure.
Was that there was a real hands-off approach, that they really let the creators do their own thing. And I think you can't do cookie-cutter superhero franchises. The audience will get bored after a while. Even your core audience, you're going to risk alienated. In fact, you're starting to see that with Marvel more nowadays.
Yes, the Marvel fatigue or the superhero fatigue. And to me, if they're doing the exact same, not rendition, obviously different actors, different time periods and things, but if they just try to replicate, like you said, kind of the cookie cutter, to me, the reboots are absolutely unnecessary at that point. And as you said, people get bored. But I think DC and Marvel have upped the game of superheroes where people expect more at this point.
And I know one of the things that you and I always talk is director choices, editing choices,
That's
music
huge.
choices. I think if you take a chance and you let your creatives shine and you trust in them, they will surprise you. And I think you'll be financially rewarded because, yeah, not everybody's going to want to see the same movie.
Yes, that's absolutely
You're
true.
not going to... The same person who sees Eternals is probably not going to be the same person who sees Blade.
That's interesting. That's interesting. But like you're saying, if somebody loves a studio or they love superheroes, the thought may be somebody, like as you said, will binge watch them all and like them all versus, well, I kind of pick and choose.
Well, to use another comic book metaphor, there's a reason I read X-Men over Avengers more often than not. X-Men has a tone that I like, but I can still appreciate the Avengers. I think if you're consistently caring for the characters, you're caring for the fans of that particular franchise, you will find that there's an audience interested in more than one path.
I think that would be true. The other part, as we were talking about with Aquaman, even though he's not my favorite, right, remembering him more from an animated version and slightly more with the 2018 version, if the story is interesting, I will go see it. And as I was saying, the beginning pulled me in and then it went off the rails for me.
The other thing is a good story can overwhelm whatever format it's in.
Yes, that's true too.
So maybe sometimes this would be better as a tie-in comic book.
That would be interesting.
And then you bridge it. I mean, sure, they can have like little winks and nods to, hey, this happened. If you read this, more on that. You know what I mean?
Yes. If you like this, you'll like this. All right, Rebecca, we have 5 moths with fins this time because they're underwater. So,
Ooh, hope they can survive for long.
yes, scuba moths. 1 to 5. What do you think?
It's 2 and a wing for me.
2 and a wing. Number 1 reason.
I definitely think this expanded on the character's journey in the sequel with a couple notable exceptions.
Sure.
Sadly, William Dafoe, some scheduling conflicts.
Yes.
But I think that this is a good in-betweener movie. Mm-hmm. And I'm still excited to see more, even though I didn't like this one as much.
My 5 moths are back. 5 scuba moths. I would say on a scale 1 to 5, I would say this is a solid 2 for me.
Makes sense.
It just wasn't exciting. It just felt like an onslaught of fish. A weak screenplay, wasn't overly invested with the characters. I understand I'm maybe not their ideal audience, but I'm not trying to be critical because I'm not their ideal audience. I just think they could have done more with the characters. They could have fleshed them out a little bit more. The writing could have been smarter. It could have been snappier. And I do think a little bit more time, honestly, and I'm burned out on the 2.5-hour movies too, but I would just say a little bit more time I think would have helped this one.
I know one of the franchises that you and I talk a lot about, and not just because Paul Rudd's in it.
Oh, yes.
Is you like Ant-Man. And one of the things you always talk to me about is character development in that franchise. You see how he grows. You see how things change within their dynamics and all that.
And this one didn't feel like he was growing. It sounds like he was still having a hard time being the king of Atlantis, still kind of whining a bit. But now he's married with a baby. And I'm thinking if that's the only growth that we have, and I say the only because obviously that's a big deal. But if that's the only indicator, like, oh, he's grown, he's matured, I'm like, that doesn't do it for me.
What, the frequent product placement of Guinness didn't convince you?
That was nuts too. Don't even get me started on that. Don't make me lower this. Better close before we low. Thanks for joining us. We're always excited to create experiences to bring our cinema community together.
Watch the notifications this weekend for our weekly show, Movies and More, where we will have more movie reviews, the latest Hollywood news, and commentary and snark meant to amuse.
Please remember to like, subscribe, and to share our channel.
If you enjoyed this movie review, you might click the link to check out our review of Wonka, or click the other link to watch last week's show, where we reviewed The Boys in the Boat.
Remember, cinema community movies are better together. Thanks for watching. See you in the next review.